Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I spent 10 years of my life working myself to the bone, sacrificing my time, my energy, and my own financial security to make sure my parents had a roof over their heads. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that it was my duty as their daughter, that this was what family was supposed to be about, supporting each other, standing together, being there when it mattered most. I worked double shifts, missed out on vacations, put off buying a house of my own, and watched as every spare dollar I had went toward keeping up with their mortgage payments. And through all of it, my younger brother Jake never had to lift a damn finger. Jake was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the son my parents adored beyond reason while I was treated like little more than an afterthought. When we were kids, it was always Jake who got the new clothes while I got the hand-me-downs. It was Jake who got a car at 16 while I had to save up and buy my own at 20. It was Jake who got a free ride to college while I took out loans that I'm still paying off to this day. And yet, somehow, I still believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just gave enough, my parents would finally see me, finally appreciate me, finally love me the way they loved him. For 10 years, I paid their mortgage without complaint. I set up automatic transfers so the money would go out on time, every time, without fail. I never asked them for anything in return, never questioned why they never mentioned it to anyone, never wondered why all their friends seemed to believe that Jake was the one helping them out. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I wasn't doing it for recognition. I told myself I was doing it because it was the right thing to do. But deep down, I think a part of me was still that little girl desperately hoping her parents would look at her the way they looked at her brother. And then, one day, everything changed. It started with something small, something stupid, something that shouldn't have meant anything at all. My mom and I were sitting in the living room, talking about a neighbor who had just gotten engaged. She laughed and said, "Oh, the family chat has been blowing up about it." The words were out before I even had time to think. What family chat? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second, a flicker of something crossing her face before she waved a dismissive hand and said, "Oh, it's just a little group chat we have. You know, me, Dad, Jake, just the usual." I forced myself to smile, to nod, to act like I didn't care, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. That night, as my dad dozed off on the couch with his phone resting on the armrest, I made a choice. Maybe it was wrong, maybe it was an invasion of privacy, maybe I should have just let it go, but after 10 years of being treated like a damn ATM, I figured I had the right to know what they were saying about me behind my back. I picked up the phone, swiped to unlock it, and tapped on the Messages app. There it was. A group chat labeled Family First. And I wasn't in it. I felt a sharp sting in my chest, but I swallowed it down and started scrolling. At first, it was nothing but the usual nonsense, jokes, gossip, complaints about work and neighbors. And then, my name appeared. Jake, Emily's sending the payment tomorrow, right? Mom, yep, like clockwork. Our little worker bee never fails. Dad, she actually thinks we need her money. LOL. Jake, as long as she keeps paying, why not? She's too dumb to realize she's just a walking checkbook. Mom, let her keep believing she's the responsible one. It's hilarious. I felt my stomach drop, my fingers tightening around the phone as I scrolled further, reading message after message of my own family mocking me, using me, laughing at my stupidity. They called me naive. They called me pathetic. They even joked about how I was probably putting off having kids or buying a house because I was too busy playing sugar mama to them. And the worst part? They were right. I had sacrificed everything for them. My future, my happiness, my sense of self-worth. And for what? For this? For a family that didn't even see me as a person? I put the phone down carefully, my hands shaking, my vision blurring with unshed tears. But beneath the heartbreak, beneath the betrayal, beneath the crushing weight of realization, something else was brewing inside me. Rage. I had been their fool for long enough. I wiped my eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and made a decision. The payments were stopping. Immediately. I didn't owe them another damn cent. And if they thought they could just laugh at me and get away with it, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts as the words burned themselves into my mind like scars I would never be able to erase. The sheer audacity, the cruel amusement, the way they spoke about me as if I were nothing more than a joke, a gullible fool, a walking bank account too stupid to realize she was being drained dry, it made me feel physically sick. I had spent 10 years of my life believing that I was doing the right thing, that I was fulfilling some unspoken duty, that family meant sacrificing for each other, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. But now, in the span of just a few moments, I saw the truth in black and white, spelled out in cold, heartless words that dripped with mockery. My mother, the woman who had raised me, the woman I had loved and trusted, had typed out those words with her own hands, laughing with my father and my brother as if I were nothing but a pawn in their game. She actually thinks we need her money. LOL. Those were her exact words, followed by an eye-roll emoji, as if the very idea of me believing I was helping them was the funniest joke she had ever heard. And my father, the man I had respected for so many years, had chimed in with his own message, as long as she pays, why not? As if my hard-earned money was nothing more than an entitlement, something they deserved simply because they had raised me, as if the decades of their favoritism toward Jake had never happened, as if I somehow owed them for existing. But it was Jake's words that cut the deepest, that left me feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath me, that made my stomach twist with a sickening combination of humiliation, fury, and gut-wrenching grief. She's dumb enough to believe she's the responsible one. Keep it going, we don't want to kill the cash cow. I had spent my entire life watching my parents shower him with affection, making excuses for why he got more attention, more support, more love. I had convinced myself that he was just lucky, that maybe I was simply too independent, too self-sufficient for them to dote on the way they did him. I had told myself over and over again that he wasn't the one to blame, that it wasn't his fault our parents treated him like he was the center of the universe while I was just an afterthought. But this proved everything I had been too blind to see. He knew. He always knew. He had known that I was the one paying for everything, that I was the one keeping a roof over their heads, that I was the one sacrificing so they wouldn't have to. And instead of thanking me, instead of showing even the smallest amount of gratitude, he had laughed about it, bragged about it, celebrated the fact that I was too stupid to realize I was being used. The worst part wasn't even the words themselves. It was the sheer, unfiltered joy in them, the way he clearly relished the idea that he was getting something for nothing, that he could keep living his cushy life without ever having to lift a finger. All because I had been raised to believe that taking care of family meant letting yourself be bled dry. I swallowed hard, my throat burning as I forced myself to keep reading, even though every part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, to scream, to cry, to break something just for the sake of doing something. But I needed to see it, all of it, needed to let every single word sear itself into my mind so I would never, ever forget what they had done to me. There were more messages, more jabs, more smug little comments about how they would have to string me along if I ever started asking too many questions. My mother had even suggested guilt-tripping me if I ever started to waver, telling Jake and my father, just remind her that we raised her and that she'd be homeless if it weren't for us. She's too soft to say no to family. My father had agreed, adding, she'll never cut us off. She's too responsible for that. We trained her too well. I felt something in my chest snap, something raw and aching and angry, something that had been building for years without me even realizing it. All my life, I had told myself that being the responsible one meant putting others first, that it meant shouldering the burden so that my family didn't have to. But now, for the first time, I saw what it really meant. It meant being used. It meant being mocked. It meant being played like a goddamn fool by the very people I had spent my entire life trying to love. I thought about all the things I had sacrificed over the years. The house I had never been able to buy because I was too busy paying for theirs. The vacations I had never taken because my extra money went to making sure they were comfortable. The relationships I had neglected because I was too exhausted from work, from stress, from constantly having to be the one who held everything together. I thought about all the times they had made me feel less than, all the moments they had made it clear that Jake was the one who mattered, that I was just a supporting character in the story of his life. And I thought about how they had laughed at me for it, how they had mocked me behind my back while I bled for them. A slow, cold clarity settled over me, cutting through the pain, the humiliation, the grief. I was done. I wasn't going to be their fool anymore. I wasn't going to be their bank account, their safety net, their backup plan. They had made it clear what I meant to them, and now it was time for me to show them what they meant to me. Without hesitation, without a single ounce of guilt, I grabbed my own phone and pulled up my banking app. With a few taps, I canceled the automatic mortgage payments. Let them figure it out on their own. Let them laugh about that. The first few days after I stopped the payments, I waited for something to happen, some kind of explosion, some furious phone call demanding to know what was going on, but instead, there was nothing but silence. It was almost disappointing, in a way, because a small part of me wanted them to notice right away, wanted them to panic, wanted them to realize that their golden goose had stopped laying eggs. But I knew it wouldn't take long before the weight of reality started pressing down on them, before the late fees began stacking up, before the letters from the bank stopped being polite reminders and started being full-blown threats. A week passed, then two, and the silence remained unbroken. I took that time to cut every last tie between us, blocking my parents and Jake on every social media platform, locking down my accounts, making sure that there was no possible way for them to reach me unless they really needed to. And when I say really needed to, I mean more than just their usual guilt-tripping tactics, more than some half-hearted attempt to manipulate me back into place. No, I wanted them to feel this. I wanted them to understand, deep in their bones, what it meant to lose the thing they had taken for granted for so long. I went about my life as if nothing had changed, but there was a newfound lightness in my steps, a sense of liberation I hadn't even realized I was craving. For the first time in 10 years, my paycheck belonged to me. For the first time in 10 years, I could look at my bank account and see a number that made me feel secure instead of one that barely managed to keep me afloat. I booked a weekend trip to the mountains, something I had always wanted to do but never felt like I could justify, and I let myself savor the simple pleasure of knowing that I didn't owe anyone anything. Then, at exactly the 1-month mark, it happened. The voicemail came through while I was at work, my phone buzzing in my pocket with a number I didn't recognize, but I knew. Before I even played it, before I even saw the transcript words on my screen, I knew. My heart pounded in my chest as I slid my finger over the screen and pressed play, bringing the phone to my ear as my mother's voice crackled through the speaker, raw and desperate in a way I had never heard before. "Emily, sweetheart, please, you need to call me back. There was a ragged inhale, the sound of muffled sobs, the kind of crying that wasn't for show, the kind that came from real, unfiltered panic. "I don't know what's happening. The bank keeps God. Emily, they're saying they're going to take the house. They're saying we're behind, and they keep sending these letters, and we don't. We can't." A choked sob, then my father's voice in the background, low and strained. A man who had always spoken with authority now sounding like he was barely holding himself together. "Emily, please," he said, and the single word was enough to make my stomach tighten, to send a cold thrill of satisfaction through me, because he had never begged before. My father had always been the strong one, the one who acted as if nothing could touch him, the one who had spent years pretending I wasn't worth the same effort he had always given Jake. And now he was begging. Now he was the one on the other side of desperation. I let the message play to the end, listened to the way my mother's voice cracked as she pleaded, listened to my father as he tried to keep himself composed but failed miserably. And when the voicemail finally clicked off, leaving nothing but silence, I simply sat there, staring at the screen, feeling something dark and satisfied settle into my bones. I took my time. I made them wait. A full day passed before I finally called back, before I finally let them hear my voice, before I finally gave them what they so desperately wanted. The phone barely rang twice before my mother answered, her voice thick with relief, with a frantic, breathless kind of desperation that told me she had been sitting by the phone, waiting, hoping, praying that I would give in. Emily, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. I didn't think you were going to. I cut her off before she could start crying again, my voice calm, measured, not giving her an inch. What's going on? I asked, as if I didn't already know, as if her voicemail hadn't spelled out every last detail in shaky, tear-soaked words. There was a pause, as if she was trying to gauge my mood, trying to figure out how to approach me, how to phrase things in a way that would make me care. Then, finally, she exhaled sharply, like she had made a decision. The bank sent a foreclosure notice, she admitted, voice trembling, and there it was. The end of the game. The moment of reckoning. They're saying we have 30 days to pay what we owe, she continued, her breath hitching, or we'll lose the house. Emily, we need you. I felt my lips curve into the slowest, coldest smirk. There it was. The moment I had been waiting for. And I had never felt less inclined to help in my entire life. I let the silence stretch between us, allowing every agonizing second to settle deep into my mother's bones, making her feel the weight of uncertainty, the same uncertainty I had felt for years while they drained me dry without a second thought. She was waiting, barely breathing, desperate to hear the magic words that would save them, waiting for me to fall back into my old role, the dutiful daughter who always put family first, the fool who always found a way to make things right no matter how much it cost her. But that version of me was gone, buried beneath the weight of every single betrayal, every lie, every moment they had laughed at my expense while they spent my money and lived in comfort. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I let out a slow, measured sigh, making sure my voice carried just the right amount of hesitation, the right amount of false concern, just enough to give her hope, but not enough to make her feel secure. I don't know, Mom, I said, dragging the words out as if I was actually considering it, as if I hadn't already made up my mind the second I listened to that voicemail. That's a lot of money. I mean, I have my own expenses too, you know? Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head, the desperate calculations, the frantic attempts to find the right angle to convince me, to manipulate me back into my place. I know, sweetheart, I know, she said, her voice shaking but still laced with that familiar, grating expectation, the assumption that if she just begged hard enough, guilt me long enough, I would cave like I always had before. But we're talking about losing the house, Emily. Your childhood home, the place where you grew up, the place where we made all those wonderful memories together. You wouldn't want to see us out on the street, would you? I almost laughed at how predictable she was, at how she still thought she could play me like a puppet when I was the one holding the strings now. The sheer audacity of it all, the shameless expectation that I would fix this for them, that I would swoop in and save them after everything they had done, was almost impressive. But I had learned from the best, and if they wanted to play games, I was more than happy to oblige. I'll have to think about it, I said finally, my voice deliberately uncertain, letting just enough doubt creep in to make her panic. I mean, it's a lot to take on, and I don't know if I can afford to cover that on such short notice. Her breath came fast and sharp, the sound of someone grasping at fraying edges, realizing that the thing they had taken for granted for so long was slipping through their fingers. Of course, I understand, she said quickly, rushing to cover up the desperation, trying to play it cool even as her entire world crumbled around her. Just, please, Emily, just think about it, okay? I promised her that I would, then ended the call without another word, letting the silence do the rest of the work for me. And then I waited. The first few hours were quiet, almost eerily so, but by the end of the day, the messages started flooding in, one after another, each one more desperate than the last. My mother sent paragraphs filled with pleas and thinly veiled guilt trips, reminding me of everything they had done for me, everything I apparently owed them. As if birthing me and raising me had been some grand sacrifice instead of a responsibility they had chosen to take on. My father, ever the silent presence in my life, sent a single message, blunt and to the point: "We need you, Emily. Don't let us down." And then there was Jake. The same Jake who had mocked me, who had laughed behind my back, who had spent years benefiting from my sacrifices without a single ounce of gratitude. His first message was nothing more than a casual, "Hey, Hope you're doing okay, as if we were old friends catching up and not siblings who hadn't spoken in over a month. When I didn't reply, his next message came through a few hours later. Mom's really worried. You know how she gets. Maybe we can talk? When I still didn't respond, his patience started wearing thin. Come on, Em, I know you're mad, but this is serious. We need your help. I let another day pass, watching as the messages kept piling up, watching as their carefully constructed facade of control started cracking, splintering under the weight of their own mistakes. By the time Jake finally resorted to begging, I knew I had won. Look, I get it, all right? You're pissed, and I don't blame you. But don't do this to them. They don't deserve this. I'll even pay you back someday, okay? Just help us out this one last time. I stared at his words, my lips curling into a slow, satisfied smile, because now he was exactly where I wanted him, desperate, vulnerable, groveling. I let them wait another day before I sent my response, keeping it short, simple, just enough to make them think they had a chance. I'll see what I can do. And then, instead of sending them a single penny, instead of lifting a damn finger to help, I picked up my phone and called a local real estate agent. Because if the house was going to go into foreclosure anyway, I might as well make sure it fell into the hands of someone who would actually appreciate it. The moment the listing went live, I knew that everything was about to change, that every carefully laid brick of my parents' entitled world was about to come crashing down around them, that the illusion of stability they had clung to for so long was finally unraveling at the seams. It didn't take long for buyers to show interest, because despite their financial irresponsibility, despite the way they had let things slide into chaos, the house itself was still in a desirable neighborhood, still sitting on a valuable piece of land, still something that someone else would see as a dream home rather than a sinking ship. And so, while my parents spent their days calling, texting, and leaving increasingly desperate voicemails, I spent my time doing something far more productive. I found the perfect buyer. I made sure to stay behind the scenes, made sure that my name never appeared on anything, made sure that when the sale finally went through, my parents would have no idea that I had played a role in sealing their fate. The buyer was a young couple, newlyweds looking for a fresh start, the kind of people who would look at the house with excitement rather than the sheer panic my parents must have been drowning in by now. I watched the process unfold with quiet satisfaction, checking in with the realtor from time to time just to make sure that everything was progressing smoothly, making sure that there were no last-minute complications that could delay the inevitable. And then, finally, the deal was done. The house that my parents had taken for granted, the house that I had kept afloat with my hard-earned money for 10 long years, the house they had assumed would always be theirs no matter how little effort they put into maintaining it, was officially gone. I waited for the call. It came exactly 2 hours after the final papers were signed, my phone vibrating violently on my desk as my mother's name lit up the screen, her number still unblocked. Still available to reach me only because I had wanted to hear this moment unfold with my own ears. I let it ring twice before I picked up, keeping my voice light, indifferent, as if I wasn't already anticipating every single word that was about to spill from her mouth. Emily. My mother's voice was raw, shaking, the sound of someone on the verge of complete hysteria, someone who had just had the rug pulled out from under them, someone who was losing. Some stranger just bought our house. They showed up with paperwork, and they said it was final, that it was already done, that there was nothing we could do. I let out a slow breath, barely suppressing the smirk that tugged at my lips, keeping my tone as casual as if she had just told me she burned dinner instead of revealing the complete collapse of their world. Oh, I said, dragging the word out just enough to let her hear the emptiness behind it. That's interesting. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line, as if she was struggling to comprehend the sheer lack of concern in my voice, as if she had expected me to panic, to rush to their aid, to swoop in and save them like I always had before. And then, all at once, the dam broke. Emily, please, we need you, she sobbed, and in the background, I could hear my father yelling, his voice hoarse with barely contained rage, the sound of a man who had spent his entire life believing he was in control only to realize, far too late, that he wasn't. We have nowhere to go. We don't have enough money for a new place. We don't know what we're supposed to do now. You can't just let this happen to us. And then, the words that I had been waiting for, the final act of desperation, the last pathetic attempt to crawl their way back into my life in the only way they knew how. Can we come stay with you? I couldn't stop the laugh that bubbled up from my chest, sharp and bitter and utterly amused by the sheer ridiculousness of the question, by the sheer nerve of it, by the fact that, even now, after everything, they still thought I was someone they could turn to for help. You must be joking, I said, my voice laced with laughter, because really, what else could I say to something so absurd? The shift was immediate. The pleading, the desperation, the attempts at guilt-tripping, it all vanished in an instant, replaced instead with fury, with the seething rage of people who had spent their entire lives manipulating others, only to finally meet someone who refused to play along. You ungrateful little brat, my father spat, his voice nearly shaking with the sheer force of his anger. After everything we've done for you, after everything we've sacrificed, this is how you treat your family? I tilted my head slightly, as if considering his words, as if weighing the sheer absurdity of them, as if letting myself truly soak in the irony of a man who had spent years taking from me now having the audacity to act as though he had been the one making sacrifices. I was your fool for 10 years, I said, my voice steady, calm, unwavering, the final words I would ever speak to them. You'll survive without me now. And then, before they could say another word, before they could attempt one final desperate plea, before they could find some last-ditch attempt to sink their claws into me again, I blocked them. Every number. Every social media account. Every possible way they could ever reach me again. For the first time in my life, I was free. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I woke up in the morning without a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, without the ever-present anxiety of making sure my parents' mortgage was paid, without the nagging fear that if I failed to send them money on time, they would come running to me with guilt-laced words and empty promises of appreciation. The silence that followed my decision to cut them off was the most peaceful sound I had ever experienced, a quiet kind of freedom that settled deep into my bones, washing away years of exhaustion, resentment, and unspoken hurt that I had buried for far too long. I moved forward with my life, step by step, day by day, making choices based on what I wanted rather than what was expected of me, taking pleasure in the simple fact that every paycheck I earned now belonged solely to me. I put my money where it should have gone years ago, toward my future, my happiness, my dreams, no longer drained by people who had never truly valued me beyond what I could provide. Within months, I had enough saved up to finally do something for myself that I had spent a decade denying. I bought my own home. It wasn't just any home, not some overpriced burden that I would struggle to maintain, not a place meant to impress anyone but myself, just a space that felt like mine, filled with warmth, filled with peace, filled with the kind of security I had spent so many years handing over to others. The first night I slept there, I stretched out in my bed, breathing in the stillness, knowing that no one could take this from me, knowing that every wall, every floorboard, every single inch of this space had been earned with my own hard work, not drained from my pockets by people who had never once appreciated my sacrifices. Meanwhile, my family, if I could even call them that anymore, was facing the consequences of their own actions, reaping exactly what they had sown after years of manipulation, selfishness, and outright cruelty. My parents, who had once lived in a house far too big for them, a home they had clung to as if it were a trophy rather than a responsibility, were now reduced to renting a tiny apartment in a less-than-ideal neighborhood. A place that was far from the comfort they had grown accustomed to. Jake, who had spent his entire life believing he would always have a safety net, that someone else would always clean up his messes, that he would never have to face the harsh realities of adulthood, was now nothing more than a couch surfer, bouncing from one friend's place to another, completely lost without the financial support that had kept him cushioned from reality for so long. The golden child, the one who had been placed on a pedestal his entire life, had finally been knocked down, forced to confront the fact that the world wouldn't bend over backward to accommodate him the way our parents had. I had once thought that cutting them off would bring me guilt, that I would wrestle with the idea of abandoning them, that I would struggle with the burden of knowing they were struggling, but the truth was so much simpler than that. I felt nothing. No remorse, no regret, no lingering doubt about whether or not I had done the right thing. I had spent 10 years giving them every part of myself, and in return, they had mocked me, used me, laughed at me behind my back while they enjoyed the comfort of a life they didn't earn. They had made it abundantly clear how they saw me, how little they valued me beyond what I could do for them, how they had never truly loved me in the way that a daughter should be loved. And when I had finally stopped playing their game, when I had finally walked away, they had tried to paint me as the villain, as the selfish one, as the person who had abandoned her family, but I knew better now. Family wasn't just the people you were born to, it wasn't just a matter of blood, it was something earned, something built on love, trust, and mutual respect, none of which had ever existed in our relationship. I had been raised to believe that loyalty to family meant sacrificing yourself, that love meant giving without limits, that duty was more important than happiness, but I had finally unlearned all of those lies. One evening, as I sat in my new home with a glass of wine in hand, I finally decided to share my story, to put it out into the world so that others who had lived through the same kind of betrayal would know they weren't alone. I wrote it all down, every last detail, every ounce of manipulation, every lie, every moment of realization, and I posted it for the world to see. At the very end, I asked the question that had lingered in my mind since the moment I had read those cruel messages in their secret group chat. How many of you have been the fool who keeps paying? The responses flooded in almost immediately, people who had gone through the same thing, who had been used by their own families, who had been guilt into sacrificing their happiness for people who had never truly valued them. The sheer volume of comments, the heartbreaking stories, the rage that so many people carried, confirmed what I had always suspected deep down. I wasn't alone. And, more importantly, I wasn't wrong. As I sat there, reading every response, every story, every person who had found a piece of themselves in my words, I realized something that I wished I had learned years ago. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger, isn't fighting, isn't proving a point to the people who hurt you. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply walking away.